Conversations podcast.
International Mother Language Day Special Edition, in collaboration with the Ngati Indigenous Interpreter Project.
Hi, and welcome back to another season of Conversations podcast. My name is Fatih Karakas. Over the past two seasons, we shared with you a total of 38 episodes with national and international guests from the TNI and the cold sectors. You can catch up on those two previous seasons on our YouTube channel, as well as Spotify, Google, and Apple podcast apps. Please remember to subscribe to our channels. The first episode of season 3 is a special edition of the Conversations podcast, where we celebrate UNESCO's International Mother Language Day in collaboration with Ngati and its Indigenous Interpreting Project. In this episode, Lavinia Heffernan from the Ngati Indigenous Interpreting Project joins me as co-host. Lavinia is a Luritja Pintupi woman from a small community 3 hours west of Alice Springs called Pupanya. She is currently working as a project officer at Ngati on the Indigenous Interpreting Project. The main aim of the project is to get as many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander language interpreters certified as possible. And now I invite Lavinia to join me on today's podcast. Hi, Lavinia. Happy International Mother Language Day to you. How's it going?
I'm good, thank you, Fatih, and happy International Mother Language Day to you.
Thank you very much. So good to have you here today. Thank you for joining me today as co-host. It's the first time I've got a co-host on the podcast.
Oh, excited. I look
Very
forward
good.
to working with you.
Thank you. Likewise. So I just want to get to know you a little bit, and so our viewers and listeners can get to know you a little bit as well. You were so kind to join us for one of our lectures last year
Yes.
with Dr. Curtis as well.
Yes.
And we got a lovely insight into Indigenous interpreting in Australia.
Mhm.
But let's have a little bit of a chat about you. How did you become an interpreter?
I guess I was born into having parents that were both translators and did a lot of interpreting, and so I grew up watching them do a lot of interpreting and translating work. So I was born into it, I guess, and from a very young age, I've always been the person interpreting for my family, whether it be going up to the shop or whether it be just walking along the street, people asking questions or purchasing something. So I guess it started informally at a very young age. As I got a bit older, as an adult, I started to work for Child Protection, and I did a couple of jobs where I was using my language quite a lot, interpreting documents and interpreting what the social workers would say or practitioners would say to the families. And I realized that one day I might get in trouble by the courts. So I thought I need something to prove that I can speak my language and I can speak English. So my journey began to investigate and find out what I could do to prove that I was bilingual and bicultural, or bilingual more.
Which language did you learn first? Was it your mother tongue that you learned first, or was it English?
Yes, so I learned my mother's language first. So my dad's first language is English and my mum's first language was language. But my dad wanted to instill in me those language skills at a very young age. And so I learned to live and breathe and eat my first language, which is Luritja Pintupi from Pupanya community.
Magnificent. I always find like my first language is Turkish, and I learned English when I arrived in Australia at the age of 9. And I think it's when I started dreaming in English, I was like, oh my God, I'm really learning this language now. What happens in your dreams? Do you dream in language? Do you dream in English, or does it go all mixed up?
It goes all over the place. And I even go back home to country sometimes, or I'm in the city, or sometimes it's in language, sometimes it's in English. It goes all over the place in my dreams sometimes. And I started to speak English when I was 7 years old, I reckon, like a lot more fluently. It might have been at the very beginning, yes, no, mum, nana, just the basic uncle, like basic words, and thank you and please. But when I went into mainstream school because I went to boarding school at St. Philip's in Alice Springs, and went to mainstream school there after attending Pupanya school right up until I was 7. And that's where I learned to read and write in my mother's language first. And then I learned to read and write and speak English. So it was a bit of a culture shock and a scary experience. And they're calling out my name, Lavinia, on the roster. And I sat there quiet, and I realized that my real name was Lavinia and not Anya. I'd been called Anya all my life. So it became a bit of a new life, a new learning curve, and just a new culture to walk into, a new environment.
Look, they're both beautiful names, I have to say. So,
thank you.
With a name like Fati, I wasn't so lucky growing up in Australia,
Yeah.
in primary school and high school here. It was a bit challenging, but I stuck to my guns. Yeah. So tell me, in your opinion, why does one's mother language play such an important role? You said that you learned your language first, and then until the age of 7, that's all you spoke. What were those very vital things in those first 7 years of your life?
I think it's instilled in me who I am today. I feel very connected to my family. I feel very connected to my land. I feel very connected to my people. I believe I have a strong sense of belongingness to my people and my country. And it's really the work that I do today. I feel like I'm really trying to just give back what they've given me. And yeah.
No, that's magnificent. Yeah, I find it the same as well. I just don't know who I would be if I didn't speak Turkish, and if I didn't learn all those things in Turkish. It just really does have something to do with identity, I have to say. Definitely. I've seen some other people of my cultural heritage here who were born and raised here and who don't have that connection with language. Not to take anything away from their personalities and their culture. It's just a little bit different, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's unfortunate, the history in Australia where languages were forcibly removed and were told not to speak it. But we were very fortunate. We were one of the last tribes to be found and brought in. And a lot of the Lutheran missionaries in Central Australia actually encouraged the people, First Nation people, to speak their language and tried to write it all down and keep documents. So we were very, very fortunate, and part of the reason why we still continue to speak our language.
What is the key, in your opinion, to ensure the continuance of language in Australia? I know that we've had quite a lot of them being extinct over the last decades.
Yeah.
And now there's, I think, a lot of work being put in.
Yeah, I like to look at it like the language is actually sleeping. And I really do hope, I know there's a lot of language centers that are around the country, around Australia, that are really trying to bring the language back in. And schools in Queensland in particular, because I've worked in schools in Queensland, are trying to implement languages back into the classroom and put more awareness and education out there around languages, and hopefully one day we'll all be hearing more languages across Australia and not just parts of Australia.
And we were talking when we were preparing for this particular episode, language and maintaining language is not just about speaking it, is it? I mean, there are other ways that language is passed on, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the biggest life lesson I learned, because I after going into Western education, I started to learn how to ask a lot of questions, because that's what they encourage you in Western schooling. And I was sitting down and asking a lot of questions one day about a different dialect in my language group. And the elderly man turned around and said to me, "Gee, you like to ask a lot of questions. Stop asking a lot of questions and just stop and listen and watch what's around you." And I realized that he didn't mean just listen with your ears, but listen with your eyes and feel what's around you and look around you and be observant of your environment around you. And so I took a step back and stopped, and I listened, and my language actually got better as time went on, which was a different language to my mother's language. Oh, my mum speaks the language, but it was a different language to what my first language was. It was a language that I was influenced into hearing and speaking without realizing, but I wanted to know a bit more about it, if that makes sense at all.
Definitely. What are your thoughts on the importance of music in passing language to younger generations?
Certainly important, especially for today's generation. Music seems to be a really good way to write songs and translate songs and
just express yourself.
Express yourself through songs. So I'm all for it, and encourage anyone, if they're musically gifted, to absolutely write it and sing it.
Look, today is the 21st of February, and we are celebrating International Mother Language Day. But I wanted to speak also a little bit about the Ngati Indigenous Interpreting Project as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and what do you do there? What is your role?
So I work along two awesome people, Eddie Saylor, who's a Torres Strait Islander and an Aboriginal man, so he's got two ethnic backgrounds, and we've got Lauren Campbell as well, who also brings a unique into the group as well. She's got a linguistic background, but also can speak Spanish and French, and so she's
pretty amazing. So,
and Creole.
Thank you so much for helping us organize today as well, Lauren.
Shout out to Lauren as well. And of course Hannah, who's on mat leave at the moment with her baby.
Congratulations to Hannah. Definitely.
Absolutely. And so my role within the IIP team, the Interpreting Indigenous Interpreting Project team, is I deliver a lot of the ethical competency and the intercultural competency training to a lot of our mob, and it's about working with them, I guess, what they already know and just building on it. So everybody that wants to become an interpreter are already culturally competent and already know all these, they already have these protocols. It's about how you use it as an interpreter, and part of my role is being that bridge to show that this is how you can use this when you become an interpreter. I also work with a lot of stakeholders and doing a lot of work with them and doing professional development for awareness around how do you interpret, doing phone interpreting, how do you interpret for NDIS, which is coming up soon, hopefully down the track soon. Centrelink's another one. So just putting something together and bringing in a cultural lens into the project and delivering.
To celebrate today, we interviewed 4 amazing Indigenous interpreters from all around the continent. That was a very, very fun experience, I have to say, editing the videos together. And I'm sure that Lauren also had a lot of fun conducting the interviews. Again, a big shout out to Lauren as well here. Before we listen to the interviews, I'd like to interview you with the same questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, so let's just take it from the top. What is your name and what is your language?
So my name is Lavinia Wipana Napaldari Heffernan, and I am a Luritja Pindapi woman from a place called Pupanya Community, which is 3 hours west of Alice Springs. And the original language of the people of Pupanya was actually Kukada, and it only later on became Luritja Pindapi because in the old days, because we're from the desert, there was a lot of drought, and we started to go into other neighboring community, and there was like a mission set at Hermannsburg, and in the Arindic language group, anybody that was seen as a foreigner coming into their country, they were called Lurinyi people. And so we were the Lurinyi people coming in from different neighboring tribes into Hermannsburg, And so we became the Lurinyi people, which later on then became the Luritja people. So there's actually two distinctive Luritja groups. There's the Southern Luritja group that sort of come from more the sort of Yankunytjatjara area, and then you had Matotjatjara area, which is towards Kings Canyon way, and then we came from Haas Bluff, Popanyo, and Manalivik and Kintor way. And we got the name Pindabi from actually the Walpri, and a lot of our men used to call out the word Pindabi, which is actually a men's word, and I'm not going to repeat it. And so they were named that, and they were predominantly from a place called Ilpili, where my great grandmother was from, and Kintor, and so put the two together and we became Luritja Pindabi. So we had the two influence of language so we had the Kukada, and then we became Luritja, and then we became Luritja Pindabi.
And how many speakers of the Luritja Pindabi?
I'm not actually exactly sure how many speakers there are, but there is Haas Bluff, Pupanya, Manalivik, and Kintor, and Kiorkora. So there's 5 communities that actually speak Luritja Pindabi. And then we've got we're part of the Western Desert dialect. So there's other dialects in the neighboring areas that also speak very similar to what we do as well. And we can understand each other and communicate.
So can you name one thing that you love about the Luritja Pindabi language?
One thing? Oh, too many things.
Like,
I love learning about the language itself. So the linguistic side of things. So what am I saying? And, and taking a step back, and I've been working with my dad, who's a linguist, and looking at the English language and my first language, and learning about the importance of the verbs and all the nerdy things. So that I find really interesting and want to know more, which can be challenging because there's not a lot out there for my language group to be able to work towards that linguistic degree.
Well, there's something for you to work on, perhaps.
Yeah, well, I've been working with my dad, so.
Can you please share for our listeners and viewers a word from your language or a phrase, and also just interpret that for us?
So we do have one phrase couple of phrases, especially when our football team wins. And it was actually, the word actually was made up by my brother, who was also a NAATI certified interpreter and incredible speaker of many, many languages. And unfortunately, we lost him last year. And the word that he used to say was "Nganako patalko," which was always shouted out or posted all over Facebook after a big football game. So that's our big phrase after big football games.
Now I'm going to ask you to slow it down, say it again, and then tell us what it means.
Sorry. Nganako patalko. So
Nganako patalko.
Nganako patalko.
Nganako patalko.
Yeah, that's the one. So Nganako means who for, patalko means wait. So who are we going to wait for?
Aha. Is that like for the next one? Who's next in line?
Yeah, pretty sounds
I like it.
it.
Who's next? Bring it on, kind of a thing.
Yeah,
Very
pretty
good.
much. And then the neighboring tribes, like the Walpri, I think have when Yuntumi wins, they're like Kojawaja, and then you've got the Majara people who win, and they're like Aidan. So everybody has their own little saying around the neighboring communities as well.
I think we should do a little video of all of the shout outs to footy, just, put them one after another. I think that'd be good.
Yes, sounds like a good idea. Need to go on the right time of the season.
I think so.
Lightning Carnival.
Tell me when, and I'll make my way there.
Easter long weekend. There you go.
Oh, not too far away.
Nope.
So now we know that you're a Luritja Pindabi interpreter. Tell us what kind of work is there for your language out there? Is it quite various?
Yeah, look, I've worked everywhere. I've gone from mental health to courthouse to hospital to doing housing to legal to so COVID's been really big. That's been probably my most dominant job, has been delivering message about COVID. And also a lot of I work for Centrelink and for banks as well. When people are trying to set up a bank or talking about cashless cards or things like that.
As you would appreciate, interpreters, we're language professionals and we love language and we're always wanting to learn more language all the time, old language so we can interpret for the older generations, and also new language to keep up to date with the kids these days, which is probably more challenging than the former. Language, as we know, is always changing, always evolving. What do you do to maintain and learn more language?
You're definitely right. Language is always evolving, always changing, always something going on. And that's in both English and in my first language. I do a lot of, I think I talk to my mum nearly every day on the phone. If it's not my mum, it's one of my other mums, so my mum's sisters. And if it's not them, it's my cousins, it's my brother, it's my sisters. So I'm constantly talking on my phone to family back home, but we also talk a little bit here in our own household as well. And my other half brings his language into the dynamic as well of speaking a Madjara. So we sort of speak many languages within one household. And I like to look at what's going on with the younger generation. I like to sit and listen to them talk, just to hear how they talk and what words they use that are new and what borrowing English words they're using. And I just really
Coining new ones.
Yeah, so like rather than saying booster for COVID, they're calling it number 3. So just listening out to little things and looking at how they do their text messaging and writing of messages on Facebook or so any kind of social media. And then vice versa with my own 16-year-old, I watch the way she writes and types and communicates and just pay close attention to all the different languages that's happening around me, whether it's the older generation or new generation. I also have dictionaries. I've got a guide to Lloyd Canterbury Dictionary. If I ever need to reflect back on something, or if there's a word that I'm stuck with or need to look up, or I'll do a few things. I'll ring mum, I'll look it up in the dictionary, I'll try and find it in a way that through conversation. There's lots of different ways for me to keep my language going. I also read our Bible, which is all written in our first language, and I encourage my other half to read it, encourage my daughter to read it, and my husband also encourages me to read his language as well. So we're constantly having language in our household.
I know you mentioned the Bible before and some of the dictionaries. This year, particularly, the International Mother Language Day focuses on technology and the importance of technology. Especially with COVID-19, we saw that remote learning especially was utilized a lot. Now, even though remote learning, remote teaching happened a lot, sometimes the students, the learners, didn't have a lot of access to technology, so they missed out on some of those things. And
it's funny that you bring that up, because Urara College, which is a boarding school in Alice Springs, have actually used social media to deliver their lessons back home to community. And so I've been watching them out of interest and quite intrigued at how they're delivering their lessons into communities where a lot of people have access to mobile phones. There is unfortunately a lot of communities that don't have access to mobile phones because there's no reception there. But a lot of them also have NBN lines that go out there as well. So they've got like Wi-Fi access and things like that. At the very beginning, you used to see people huddling around the shop using the Wi-Fi, around the school using the Wi-Fi. But now it seems to be that people are starting to understand this new way of life of using new technology, which is what we've been doing with Nadi as well. We've been delivering online as well, and people are starting to follow through and understand and be upskilled in these areas.
Just a year or two ago, we were discussing saying that for Indigenous interpreters, online PD wasn't really the best option. They wanted it in person. But look at it now, huh? Like
100%. Like it's amazing how something like this can it goes to show how adaptable we are in the things that we do. I mean, we've always had to learn this way of life. Like we've always had to, even though we lived in the bush, we've had to learn this Western way, and we seem to just gradually get our way in there and find out and work it out. So
just humanity in general, our adaptation skills always there. And I love what you say about that school who was teaching through social media, because not everyone might know how to use, let's say, Zoom or Skype or some of the other remote teaching tools, but everyone would know how to use Facebook, or everyone would know how to
absolutely
well,
that's how I knew about them delivering these classrooms, was through Facebook. So
what a great idea.
So they were actually showing how they were delivering like how the teacher was standing in front of the camera, and they had these computers and camera and recording of how they were recording their live lessons.
That is such a great idea. And then you can just comment on the video if you want to ask a question. Wow, there we go. Might be onto something there. Well done. So this year marks the Indigenous Languages Decade. So UN has also declared 2022 to 2032 the UN Decade of Indigenous Languages. What do you hope might be achieved for Luritja Pintupi by the end of these 10 years? Where would you like to see your language in 10 years?
Well, I've got a brother who's pretty handy with the computer and knows how to create things on the computer. Don't ask me for technical words because I don't know.
We'll go with things on the computer.
I would really like to see somebody like himself work alongside people like my dad and various other linguists and language speakers to create programs. I know that he was keen to get Minecraft out there, but didn't end up happening, unfortunately, for various reasons. But he was trying to create a Minecraft game in our first language, and I think they ended up doing it with, I think, one of the Torres Strait Islander languages and WA languages. But more things like that, more awareness, and to be able to study my language without needing to go through about 20 universities to try and find what I need to find, make it more accessible for others in future. Would love to be able to see more signs and more, just more awareness put out there that, this languages still exist. And not just my language, but also going back into the classroom around Aboriginal English as well, like teachers becoming aware that this is a form of language. And sometimes that there's a communication barrier there, and just a lot of awareness to be put out there about Aboriginal English, which is almost like Creole, or
Well, I think what you say is very important there. Just making language a part of everyone's daily life, not just the Indigenous language speakers, but also English speakers, so that we learn the languages as well. We appreciate the language and the culture, but sometimes even we should be forced to learn the language. Sometimes when you go to another country, you have to look up in a dictionary on the signs what it is, or sometimes they have it bilingual. And you pick things up, and like you said, it would be really good to see just everyday things more in language.
Yeah, I know that in Alice Springs, a lot of work. I think Jody, shout out to Jody from AIS, worked a lot with trying to get the Aranda signs up for the rangers and for people doing all the Larapinta trails and the walking, and it's becoming part of everybody's language in Central Australia. And I think Aranda with Dave Moore and my mum Jeanette McCormick teaching it in schools is, it's starting. But how amazing would it be if you had signs in 2 languages in the streets? And
I think we'll get there. I'm confident. I think we'll get there. And from what you're saying, work is being put into that as well. And I think that's key, just making language parts of all our lives and not just Indigenous language speakers.
Definitely.
Anya, thank you so much. Now,
thank you for having me.
No, thank you very much. That was a great conversation. Now, let's have a look at Indigenous interpreters and their interviews. So I'm looking forward to watching this.
Yeah, me too.
I'll talk to you soon.
No worries. Cheers.
What is your name?
Belda Naburula Shannon Wandapari.
Nathaniel Coulthard.
Leonora Adidi.
Derek Lika Murpo Scott Jalarin Ngarangarango Uruwiwi Hunt.
What is your language?
Majira.
Waramo and Warpri.
The Jabarapuigo language.
Kalau Kawauya. I also speak another language. I speak the Creole language of the Torres Strait, and it's called Yunplatok.
Where is your language from?
Middle of Northern Territory.
Waramo language is more around the Tennant Creek area, and the town of Tennant Creek is on Waramo country. Warpri language is more in the Tenamai area.
Jabarapuigo is pretty much spoken throughout northeast Arnhem Land.
Kalau Kawauya is from Saibai, Duwan, and Boigu Islands in the Torres Strait, and it's also spoken on the mainland and Cape York Peninsula and communities of Bamaga and Saisia.
How many speakers are there of your language?
I'd say there'd be about 5,000 Jambarapuigo speakers. So Jambarapuigo is a part of the Yolngu Matha language family. Yolngu Matha meaning Yolngu and Matha. So Yolngu is people or person, and Matha tongue. So people's tongue.
Warpri language speakers are numbered to around 2,000. Waramo language speakers are less than 100.
Well, we have 3 different communities. So each community, from my last understanding, would be 500 speakers, I reckon.
It's probably less than 1,000. I'm just guessing. It's not a lot of people left. With Yunplatok speakers, if you look at the population of Torres Strait Islanders, that's how many people speak the language.
What do you love about your language?
I think any language is probably better than English. It follows the rules of the actual language system. You look at the word Australia, there's 3 A's in that word, and they all have different sounds. You won't find that in Yolngu Matha or in Jambarapuigo.
Talk to my family members. I'm really proud of it, and I love to speak it, and I'm proud to be a Majira interpreter.
I love my languages because it connects me to my family, to my country, to my history, and it makes me feel proud that I'm speaking in a language that my people have spoken for many thousands of years. I love the richness. It's very poetic. I love to break down the words to find out the meaning of that word, where it comes from. And when you do that, that's when you find out like how rich the language is. And the other thing I like about my language is that it's the most appropriate language to express your feelings, to describe the world around you, to describe the environment, the place where we live in. And also, it's the most appropriate language to express our culture.
Could you share a word in your language with us?
Abijira Ngalakana in Warmongo is come to hear, and the same meaning in Warpri is Yandani Nyambukura.
Lagane Mura Mandran. So it means, hello, what's happening? Are you alright?
Nalpan, it means ours. So Nalpa is all of us. Nalpan means this belongs to us.
Look when you hit the football with your foot.
What type of interpreting work is there for your language?
Mental health, just going out, communities with specialists, with the government group, for big conferences and all that.
For Warpri and Warramung interpreters, there are lots of work to do, more so in health, and even interpreting on the phone or by Zoom to doctors that are in hospitals in the big cities. And with the legal stuff and courts. I find that I've done so much work in those areas.
More than most other Indigenous languages, I can say, ranges from, Centrelink, the Supreme Court. But I guess the most memorable interpreting job I have been a part of is when myself and a colleague of mine, who also happens to be my youngest great auntie, we actually interpreted in Parliament up in Darwin. I've got to say I was really nervous.
With interpreting work for Kalakaua or KKY, as we like to abbreviate it, and Yunpatok, it's a new arena. So the work is not all that demanding because we're still letting the market know. It's coming through, I'd say slowly, but the work is there, definitely there for interpreters.
What do you do to maintain your language?
As a professional interpreter, I always work to the Code of Ethics, which is important through my Ngati training, and to be able to do the work working alongside of professionals. I do a lot of self-learning when I'm sitting at home or with elders out bush. I'm always listening to words and phrases in both of the languages to learn and understand. I ask questions if I don't know what that word is. So I'm always learning.
I guess the best way to do that is to actually go back home, back to Northeast Arnhem, back to Elko Island, where I'm from, and just be with family, just be in the community.
Well, I ask a lot of questions, especially when I'm around an elderly person. As a group, probably sit down and discuss words and phrases. It's good to go back community as well, and hopefully there will be someone out there that's always happens to have the time sit down and discuss and learn off them.
It takes a while for new words to catch on, but if we want to name things, usually name things, say for example, a computer or a phone, new technology, things like that. It's something that we as older language speakers, particularly the people that are working with language, such as myself and other linguists, we would usually sort of, discuss amongst ourselves, like, what can we call this thing? What is the word for computer? So we would come up with a word like Azazti, which means artificial brain. But certainly word coinage, thinking of new words, is very interesting.
How do you keep up to date with how kids speak?
Young people of today, they speak more English and a few phrases of their languages, and it's challenging as an interpreter. You have to be mindful of how they speak the language or how they're speaking to you, wherever we are in the community. Doesn't have to be in an interpreting job. We have to be alert all the time to understand how these young ones are speaking language, so that when we're doing interpreting alongside of these young people, we can understand and help them to understand even better what's being said.
The younger generation is always coming up with certain words, and they'll either take an English word or they'll take a language word and they will anglicize it in some way. They might put English suffixes on there. I'll give you an example. There's a word that means see you again, or we'll do it again, means again. And we say lak kai or lak kaini. So the younger people come up with laks. We don't put S at the end of our words. So that's the S is from English. We don't put S at the end of our words, and we certainly don't abbreviate our words.
I've got a lot of nephews and nieces. You see a lot of things on Facebook where people play games. An example is where they play this game called Dulk, which basically is mimicking a shot from a gun, meaning you trick someone. Hey, look over there, and that person looks, and you go, oh, you made you look. So when someone's walking past, you go Dulk, and they'll look at you. D-O-L-K, Dulk.
What resources do you use to keep your language strong?
Our living libraries, our living encyclopedia, and that is our elders. They are the ones who I tap into. I will very rarely look up something in a dictionary or online, look up a word, unless it's a word in another dialect. That's when I will look it up just to check. But then I will always check that again with a speaker. So I'm always checking and making sure that the words that are available are appropriate. One
of the best things to do is to actually be around people that speak the same language. From an interpreting point of view, I think Ngati does well. The Aboriginal Interpreter Service throughout the NT, I was part of the training teams, so I know what they're capable of. They're pretty good.
What do you hope might be achieved for your language by the end of the UN Decade of Indigenous Languages?
The new generation to be able to speak English well. But on the other hand, it shouldn't have to eliminate the other side of who they are. It shouldn't have to come at the cost of their culture or their language. I think Djambarrpuyngu language is quite strong, and I think the way that we use it, the Yolngu people use our languages, I think it'll be around for a while. Dari milkunami. So Warrior is get up, Dari is stand up, and Milkunami show up.
Encouraging other languages to support one another and more changes and more language involved in life.
I would like to see more work done with our people in these language groups to keep their languages strong, to develop their programs, to love their languages, to speak their languages, to write songs and celebrate in their languages.
What I would like to see at the end of 10 years of this decade, I want to see 10-year-olds speaking KKY fluently as the first language, as the first chosen language. I want them to be able to converse to each other in the playground in KKY. And it is a wish that I have for all other endangered Indigenous languages. It's going to happen. This is the decade of the international Indigenous languages.
Thank you for joining us for today's special edition of the Conversations podcast. I'd like to thank again my co-host, Lavinia Heffernan from the Ngati Indigenous Interpreting Project, and our Indigenous interpreters, Leonora Adidi, Derek Hunt, Valda Shannon, and Nathaniel Coulthard. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you next time.